Okay, well, we have ticked over 12, so I guess I'll start with welcome. This is have you been to the previous meetings, Cian?
No, not yet. That
Okay.
was in US. That's not a good time for me.
That was my issue. I went to a couple of these. I might get Matt to just describe what this is about and kind of why this has been started. And then we'll get stuck into some of the previous issues. So Matt, did you want to give a brief sort of rundown?
Sure, yeah. So this was initially started. We had a group working towards doing some method reporting guidance, and during that meeting, there were some clinicians there who were interested in coming up with some standards protocols for clinical eye tracking tasks. So any kind of clinical eye tracking, we haven't formally defined, whether that applies only to psychiatry, neurology, or whatever that might be, but any clinical applications of eye tracking, coming up with a set of default protocols that would allow patients to be able to be seen in different locations and expect to be doing typically similar types of tests, because there are a lot of test centers doing clinical eye tracking tasks at the moment, and they're all doing it in their own ways, and everyone seems to be doing it in a way that's acceptable, but it's difficult for one test center's data to be shared with another test center, or for a patient to move between two test centers and to see if there's been any progression in their condition, whatever that condition might be. So in a nutshell, that was why ISCET was originally set up, which was only back in March this year. So as you can see, it's still a very small thing. We're still kind of setting up the committee. And during this time, what we've also, we could actually bring up the details of the three. Yes, we have a kind of three main aims as a society. So the first one is what I've just said, which is the reason it was formed in the first place, which was to provide default guidance and protocols for conducting and analyzing eye tracking tasks. Second thing is just to provide a unified voice for people who work in the field of clinical eye tracking. And the third thing is to maintain reference data sets, by which we mean sometimes known as control data, or a sense of, if you're going to be able to determine that one individual's eye tracking results differs from normal, then we need to have normalized data sets. And at the moment, this is one of those things that each lab is having to collect for themselves. So in order to make it easier for people to join the field and to actually make clinical eye tracking more accessible, that was a kind of third aim, was to maintain reference data sets. Again, I'll just post the link to the kind of the about page on here. So that was the main aim. At the moment, we're at the point we've been meeting roughly monthly, and we have these three different regions. So Asia, Australasia is today's meeting. There's a Europe and Africa meeting, and then there's a meeting to meet North and South America, basically the three different time zones. So we're in the point of setting up committee, trying to attract more people to actually get involved in the process of these meetings. And then the main kind of first bit of real work that we're actually doing as a society is trying to understand what clinical eye tracking is actually done around the world, in order for us to decide what the priorities should be for standard protocols to be working on. So obviously there's a lot of different things that eye trackers are used for. And some of us that have come into this, my involvement has been mostly in nystagmus. I know that Larry as well has done a lot of work in nystagmus, and there may well be lots of other uses out there that we aren't aware of, perhaps in other countries. So we're trying to just characterize what is done around the world, and in doing so, we're setting up probably like a survey questionnaire type study, where we are going to approach different professional bodies around the world, representing different clinical fields that we know work with eye trackers, and ask them and or their members what it is they do, what patients they see most of, and a few other questions to be able to work out them where should we start in terms of developing clinical protocols. So, and I'm just to finally say as well that we're not just looking at clinical protocols for data collection, but also a standardized pipeline for analyzing that data, because of course, once you've got a data set, there's so many different ways that you can actually so many details you can change, things like high pass frequency cutoffs and all that kind of stuff, which actually makes a difference downstream to what the results are that you get out from an eye tracker. So it's that whole package. What would be a default protocol? And finally, these aren't supposed to be dictating to the field how that they should actually do their work, but it is a way of saying, like, if everything else is equal and it doesn't matter to you, then here is a set of defaults that you could use, and then we're all speaking the same language internationally. So I'll leave it there.
Cool. So today we're really trying to have a look to talk through the survey that I've just popped up there. So to add to that, anybody can jump on that if they want to and have a look at it. I have gone through and popped some of the Australian specific stuff on there. So thinking about our optom body, our ophthalmology body, obviously our regulatory body, which is TGA, those sorts of bits and pieces, just to make sure that they get captured as well. But I think it'd be really great if they were picked up from the other areas as well. So it might be something, and again, this probably comes back to comms. I'm thinking, you know, if we're talking New Zealand, if we're talking different parts of Asia, they're all going to have country-specific ones. And so that, I think, is where we need to be picking them up. And I don't know if that's one where we should be kind of targeting people specifically to go, hey, can you have a quick squiz at this and make sure that we've got the list correct? I did have a question in terms of asking the bodies, you know, what portion of your consults would have eye tracking, and I think that's a really awkward question for something like optometry, because it's going to be really specific on the practitioners that they ask. So for example, I'm an optom, and most of my practice, because I'm now in academia, it has a lot of eye movements involved. Whereas I would think your generic optom on the street does very, very minimal. So that I think is a really awkward question, but I don't know whether or not that's the sort of response we're going to look for from the representative bodies, or whether or not it should be kind of asking more what conditions. Yeah, Matt?
So one of the original, when we originally set the or began looking into this questionnaire study, there was a question as to whether we should be looking at individual members of representative bodies, or whether we should be asking the representative bodies themselves. At the last meeting about a month ago, the decision there was to approach the representative bodies, but ask them to then distribute the questionnaire to their members. So this question about, you know, how many patients are you seeing would actually go to individual members. But this is just a way of us actually reaching those members. There are obviously potential, sorry, go on.
Will there be different surveys that'll go out to them? Because I'm just thinking it'll need to be a very clean version of, hey, can you distribute this to your members, as opposed to the questions that we're going to be asking for, say, some of the eye tracking companies, which will need to be a separate kind of piece to them as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, whether this goes to companies is another question. I guess that might be a slightly different set of questions that goes to them. I mean, obviously, part of this is just we just want the information, and secondly, that was decided that this could be a publication, so that would need it to be a structured survey that allows us to actually collect data we can compile. The problem then comes if you're approaching manufacturers and you're approaching clinicians. You can't necessarily use the same question set. And I mean, that's quite apart from the potential difficulties of actually reaching individual members of a representative body, because some people you might contact them and they say, hey, sure, great, I'll send this out to absolutely everyone. And then other ones might say, oh, actually, we can't do that because of data protection. And you know, so it could get quite tricky actually trying to get this out there. I think it's going to go on.
Yeah, I guess one of my questions is would this be better as a focus group, or a number of small focus groups?
Quite possibly, yeah. I mean, this is still in its infancy, deciding how this is going to work, and so maybe something like that would be more appropriate. So this is for, you know, to be decided here, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I had no luck at all with NOSA. I was allowed to put up a slide during the intersession break, but could not speak to it. So I suspect nobody had any idea at all why that slide was there.
And that was because they deemed it to be advertising, right?
Yeah,
which is odd, because we're existing just to represent the field, not to make money anywhere. But there we go. Yeah, okay.
I tried.
Yeah.
How about an ARVO SIG? Now that those are online.
What's that? Sorry.
Special interest group.
Special interest group and ARVO are now virtual. They're not at the physical meeting, but they get promoted as part of ARVO. So that might be a way of engaging.
Yep, okay. Particularly if we organise, say, one of the sessions to be almost like an offshoot, whether it's just before or just after the ARVO meeting, and whether or not we could book a room attached to that so that people who are there could meet up in person. Because that's one where a lot of people do go.
Yeah, the thing is that the SIGs now are no longer physical. they're virtual.
Yeah.
But whether we could still have something at the meeting, that would be handy.
Yeah.
And this would be a way of looking into the different individual clinical or clinicians using eye tracking.
I mean, because there's certainly a lot of people. I mean, it's not the biggest part of Arvo, but there's certainly a lot of eye movement related stuff still at Arvo. And the fair bit of it is clinically related. So that at least it's a potential venue, and it's not tied to any one profession. So it kind
although
of
it does specify ophthalmology, so psychiatry and so on may not be there, or audiologists and so on.
Presented neuroscience, and vision research. So, and that's been there for about 50 years. So it isn't really, even though the bulk of stuff is probably from ophthalmos, certainly it's always had optoms, neuroscientists, psychophysics people, and it's, that stuff tends to be more human driven than, say, neuroscience, where most of the data come from animals.
So are you proposing that as a place to run a focus group for this questionnaire study?
I'm not sure how we'd organize that. I do hope to go this year, but also the online special interest groups could be a proposal, and they get promoted as a piece of Arvo. They just aren't there physically. I'm trying to see how you propose that for this coming year.
So one of the other things that we're concerned about is that, and with the whole point of this survey, was to work out, are there some clinical professions that we are not aware of that are using the eye trackers? But I suppose the manufacturers will have that answer because they'll know who their customers are. So it's just making sure we get representative answers from each of the different fields that ISCET is meant to represent as well. So we don't know what we don't know until we realize that vets are using it all the time, and we just didn't know, for example.
I can't. Oh, there it is.
Have you found it?
Let's see. Trying to find the SIG proposals. Well, that didn't work. Oddly, I'm not sure. I can't find anything about SIGs for this year. I found the proposals for last year. So I don't know what become of that, which is odd. I'll keep looking, but if they exist, that might be a possible venue virtually to propose something. But they go throughout the year. Yeah, don't know what happened to Arvo 2024.
That's all right. I like the list that's there. I think the list that is going up and getting people from all over the place to contribute to that is going to be very helpful. My thought when I was looking at that is to do focus groups, but to have, the input, to avoid the bias, have the input coming from all over the place. So anyone who's currently flagged it and seen it is interesting, to go, yep, these are the sort of main groups that we could have, whether that's a manufacturer, have more than one, but have manufacturers as a focus group, have clinicians as a focus group, have researchers who provide some of those clinical eye movements as a focus group, to kind of feed into that. And a lot of that will then be identifying the themes of which groups is this useful for, and some of the questions could then be, is this useful for us? What particular eye movements are we kind of looking at? So whether that's those basic eye movements, the scan pathy type, so sort of putting them into categories and creating those categories based on what comes out of some of that. Because I think at the moment that's where we're looking at this and we're going, okay, well, what about this viewpoint? What about that viewpoint? How would we write that in a survey? And I'm just concerned if we go straight to a survey that we're going to miss some of those.
That's a good point.
But yeah, I do think we have a bigger comms issue before we get there of how to get these things out. Because obviously this is quite small, having started with the 70 odd in the first couple, and then down to 10, 12, and now 5.
Yeah.
I'm sort of looking at that and going, well, I didn't see these come through, and I'm running it. So how do we do that, and how do I help? I guess is my question. So yeah, is there? I'm quite happy to stick my hand up for Australasia as a rep to help out there, but equally to help out with comms if that's what sort of needs to happen. I guess thinking about it, how often would people want things to go out, and do we want things being sent out as sort of a calendar invite type thing that pops up? That way it's adjusted for everyone's time zones.
That would be useful. That would definitely be helpful. I guess the other thing is also being able to put it out there to contact people who aren't already on this list, because we need to be approaching as many clinicians as possible. Clinician researchers, manufacturers, people who have an interest in this kind of committee.
I can think of about a half dozen clinicians that send generally nystagmus patients to us reporting, and none of them have ever, I don't believe, ever joined any of these sessions, but they have enough interest to refer patients to us for eye movement recording. So that's a group who may want to have input, but not via logging on to a meeting online, especially during the time. So I just have to go open the door during the time that they'd be at their practices.
Yeah, they tend to run theirs at sort of 7, 8 o'clock at night. So there's often, meetings where they've got other bits and pieces that are attached to that. I do know that there's other ones where I could be putting this up and advertising for it. I guess that's sort of where I'm thinking maybe as the regional coordinators, we go through lists and just go, here's the next one, mass mail out. Here's how to join so almost having a standard, here's how to join, here's the info type comms that go out. So one of those things that was on the list is setting up materials and strategy for thinking and presence at these sort of events. I have put together a slide that I think Larry used at NOSA, but I would welcome anyone's sort of input in changing, altering that. That was just me going, this should go up and we should try and get this out. Having a look at it now, I also think it needs to have probably the actual website on it as well, because you won't necessarily use a QR code if you just get this sent around to you. But on the main homepage, I'm sort of wondering if we could alter that and have a big, join the mailing list button when you do come to ISCET. And I guess the other question I had was, can we this doesn't come up if I Google it, is my big problem.
Yeah. This was raised at the last meeting as well, is that this is not a very visible website, and that will be something that will be very helpful if you're volunteering to be communication secretaries to kind of look into. We had Mario Giardini, who was at the last meeting. He's based in Glasgow, I think, in the UK, or maybe Aberdeen. He had offered to help out with the website type side of things. So looking into how ISCET have a bit more of web presence, because at the moment, even if people aren't aware of us and we're looking for whether such a body exists, they won't find it unless they happen to have had links with somebody who's posted this thing. With regards to signing up to the mailing list, that is currently on the website. If you go on the homepage, it's the first thing that appears. It's just not a very nice big button. So again, there could be a lot done to the website. At the moment, I've just been maintaining this free Google Sites thing, but it's very much not visible. It's just a placeholder before we have something a bit more, a bit more visible. So thank you, Amanda, for volunteering for that role and the Asia role. I'm guessing you won't want to have to hold 2 roles forever, but that's really helpful for now. So that means the committee is. We've now also had, as you've seen on the mailing group, a voluntary position for the Europe Africa. So that means the committee, we do actually now have all the roles, which is great. I'm
absolutely not keen to be in both for very long, and I'd rather have the Asia Australia one, but I'm just looking at it and going, this is I think if this is going to get up, we need to do something in that space. And I would welcome anyone who wants to help in that space for the comms section, because that's not a strong suit. But even if it's just here it is out to the mail out, here it is, the day before, reminder this is coming type email that goes out. And then making sure that everyone who's on that mailing list is actually getting an email, I guess, is my other point.
Yeah.
Because I know it did go around CVNet, but I didn't see the mailing list link from that when it went through. So maybe there's other aspects of that when it goes out.
Yeah, definitely make it more visible. I know. So I've put down here on the notes for today's meeting, because I'm just keeping the minutes from the meeting, that we so to maintain a kind of list of lists, so that whenever there's a meeting on, we can go to those lists and say that CVNet being one of them, and all those kinds of things, so it can be promoted regularly on those channels rather than just through our own channel, because we still need to get people to sign up to that in order to actually know about this. So it's just letting people know that this is on.
Google ISCET, you get International Society of Certified Electronics Technicians.
Yep.
Right.
Which is not us.
It still doesn't work even if you put in ISCET and eye tracking. That was my concern. So even if I specified eye tracking, it still didn't come up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got a YouTube link. So that's
good. Yeah. So that's where I've been posting the videos for ISCET. But I know nothing about search engine optimization, so I don't even know what the acronym is. I mean, so far I've just been putting those details on the website as somebody who really knows nothing about this. So it'd be good to have a hand with that. And as I said, Mario has said he's keen to help out potentially with the website side of things as well.
So are we getting a domain name, I guess, is my question with that, because that was my understanding when that's more likely to pop up. So Google doesn't generally find a Google site.
Yeah, I think we will need to get a domain name. Obviously, we need to work out where the funding from that's coming from. It won't be a huge amount of money required, but at the moment we don't have membership fees or anything like that. So we will need to find some way of making that happen in the early stages.
Cool. Is there anything else that we've kind of missed? Where's my agenda? In terms of individual members that have been promoting it at international conferences, set of materials and a strategy for that, is there anything other than a slide that we need to be putting together, I guess, is my question. So what needs to happen?
I guess we need to think about whether there would be, which conferences would be attended. This is something a couple of people have asked me. They said, are we at conferences? And I've been like, by all means, please go ahead and do that. There's what are they called now? There's this eye movement specific meeting, and who was it? Jorge Otero Milan had been saying to me that he could potentially be involved in setting up a kind of similar to an ARVO SIG, really, a special interest group at, I can't remember what the conference is now, but it's one it's a European one.
The European Conference on Eye Movements.
Sorry? No, not ECEM. No, it's another one.
Ever?
No, it's not ever. I'll find. Oh, it's in my emails.
Is that ETI?
Which one?
I can't find it right now. But anyway, there was somebody was talking to me recently and saying, should we have a presence at this particular meeting? And I guess the answer is yes, absolutely. But I guess this is one of the things we need to work out is how does ISCET present itself at these meetings, and which meetings to do that, because obviously this is primarily about clinicians, but it's probably going to be the clinician researchers that are going to be at these meetings spreading the word. Clinicians themselves on the ground aren't necessarily going to have these international links in quite the same way. So
Yep. Cool. Just going through the list. Was there anything else that we needed to talk about? I think we've talked about any additional professional bodies that can be approached for the use of the survey. I think the best way is actually just to ask people to add to that list. That's an excellent list that's kind of been put up.
So we keep putting that out. Obviously, there's a mention here about just formally saying, so it's Russia. Samia Mustafa has volunteered for the role of Europe Africa. She put that message out via the mailing group, but I just wanted to make sure that I've been brought up at the meeting and that I haven't had anybody else come forward for that role. So that would be her formally co-opted onto the committee.
Yep. Cool.
I'm more than happy to help. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. Because I also am doing eye tracking research, but I'm not a clinician, so I'm still looking for kind of applications like for our research. But I'm more than happy to promote these. Yes, and anything I can do, just let me know.
Great.
What area are you in?
Oh, I'm doing some kind of signal processing, potentially just to computer eye behaviors. So just from these raw eye images, have similar doing some research on different novel eye behavior patterns and for mental state analysis. So, so I wanted to have some kind of application on mental disease diagnosis. This is my main goal. So yes, but I know there are a lot of applications. I met quite a few people. They are interested in eye tracking, but they don't know how to use that. So yes,
would you be happy to send this on to a sort of a bunch of your contacts?
Yes, definitely.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's certainly a history of like looking at scan paths in a range of sort of neurocognitive disorders. So I mean that's quite relevant.
Yeah.
There are. I mean, I can actually just paste in our third meeting. We had a quick question of the various disciplines and clinical disorders that people work with at that particular meeting. There were 12 people at that meeting, and I'll just paste into the chat here the list that came up. So that those are the various clinical disciplines / disorders that people were representing at that meeting, and that seems to be largely what we're finding. But I think we've been early on in this process just checking, we may think that we're all the clinicians that are using eye trackers, but we know there may well be others out there, so we've been open to anybody else who wants to be involved. So there's a kind of list of things. So Amanda, I mean, if you wanted formal help with the comms secretary side of things, then Sian,
yeah, do you want to do the comms side, Sian?
Yeah, sure.
Yep, and then I'll stay as Australasia rep, if that makes sense. That way I'm not across.
Okay, yeah, I'll put that down on here. So, Sian, if this is your first meeting, just to let you know, this at the moment these committee roles are being filled voluntarily. We've got a full committee. One thing we will need to decide is we'll need to decide a threshold either for membership, whatever membership means at this moment, or a period of time, at which point we would all basically abandon the committee roles and then have people formally voted in as you would expect in a normal society. But because we're still in the early stages, it's just whoever wants to fill the roles at the moment. So we will now all have to decide, and that include myself as well. I would basically put those roles up for other people to vote into.
One thing that might be helpful, Matt, now that we've got a full committee, is actually just to have a committee meeting to talk through some of the pure straight logistics of, hey, can we add this to the website, or could you put this out to your group, or hey, how are some of these aspects going to run? So I realize that they're not wanting to be owned by any one person, but I think just giving the committee ownership might make things move a little bit more smoothly until we can get to that point.
Yeah, so we would then distinguish. At the moment, it's unclear whether the meetings we're having at the moment are kind of organizational or meant to be moving forwards the specific projects. I mean, at the moment, the project is simply this survey study. So if you think there'd be value in having separate meetings as well, then we can potentially have interim ones.
Well, a lot of the things that I'm thinking at the moment, so thinking through, say, the slide, thinking through where things should be on the website, thinking through, hey, how do we get things out? What do we do in terms of domain name, etc. I think a lot of those could be answered by, we're bringing up specific people that were at previous meetings, but won't necessarily be on this sort of a time frame like yourself. But it might be helpful just to have one or two to kind of get things started and moving and rolling with those in terms of the setup.
Okay, yeah, I'll make a note. We can organize that. So yeah, because it's basically it's the three of us in this one plus Robert Alexander and Russia, Samir Mustafa. So she would be on that as well. So that would be the five of us get together and go through more procedural type stuff, and then hopefully we can have a bit more focus on moving things forward in these meetings, which will be more of interest to clinicians themselves.
Yeah, because I don't think clinicians are so much caring about getting it out as the, hey, what are they making the decision on this? What have been the outcomes for X, Y, and Z?
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
I think we would probably still, for transparency, make sure that those meetings, we still record those and put those on the website as well.
100%.
All out there. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Did anyone else have? Yeah, go.
I was going to say I will contact the other members of the committee then, now that we have a full committee. Well, not right now because it's the middle of the night for me now, but sometime tomorrow or the day after, to organise. We can get together for a smaller meeting to go through procedural stuff, and then hopefully we can then get these things on a slightly more regular basis for the main meetings as well.
Yep. Did anyone have anything else? I realise that we're not at the hour, but did anyone have any other business that we should be adding to this?
One thing you mentioned on here. Oh, sorry, go on. Okay, sorry, go on.
Priyanka.
Yes.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm from India. I'm doing my PhD. So I'm in my final year. I just saw the survey. This is my maybe second meeting, very first meeting I attended, and now only I'm joining. I just saw a few videos and joining here. This survey, I have always a question why eye tracking is never brought into clinical setup. We know the limitations, but from each discipline's point of view, if we can bring in that question as part of survey, will that be helpful? So that in survey at least we will know why it's not brought into clinics better.
Are you able to edit the link I've put in the chat?
Can you guys hear me?
We can still hear you,
because of
can't see
internet
you.
issue, I'm just switching my video off.
Okay.
Yeah. So I
And the
was
link.
just saying, please continue, sir.
So I've just sent the link again that Amanda was talking about. If you click on that link, you should be able to modify the document yourself. So there is lists of questions on there that would be asked of the individual representative bodies. And if I understand correctly, you're saying that we need to be asking, why is it, do you think, that eye tracking is not more prevalent in clinics? Is that right?
Yeah.
I think it's a valid thing. It's a nice kind of open-ended question. You can say, what in your opinion, why are there not more of these? And it's also worth bearing in mind that at the moment, a lot of clinical devices are not licensed, or a lot of eye tracking devices are not licensed for clinical use. And this is one of the things that hopefully ISCET, now representing the sector as a whole, can provide a bit more of a voice to say, hey, look, we're here, the clinicians are here, and we are wanting to use this more for these purposes. So the various manufacturers of eye tracking devices may be able to then actually obtain proper licensing so that they can be used in that way rather than being used off-label, as it were.
Yeah, more feasibility questions might help.
Yeah, so you can edit that document directly. That's for everyone to modify.
Sure, I'll add it. Thank you.
Great. Amanda, one thing I just wanted to mention, which is on today's agenda, which doesn't seem to have come up yet, which was talking about how ISCET can involve input from manufacturers and regulators without them then providing an undue bias due to conflicts of interest. Yep. This wasn't just in relation to the survey study, but it was just in general when we come to developing the standards. We aren't at that point yet, but I know that there are a few manufacturers. CRS is one. Bolbitec's been involved here. I think we've had Tobii representation as well, and so that, when we're actually coming up with standard protocols, the manufacturers are, they may all want to have some input on those, but we need to make sure that input is doesn't allow for too much of a conflict of interest in terms of their own devices that they have an interest in. So that was just one thing to discuss.
My thoughts on that is to actually just make sure that the number of them are balanced in terms of whatever comes forward. So making sure that we've got more than, say, one or two in each piece where we're asking these questions. And again, that's where I'm sort of thinking, hey, could we look at what they send back and go, okay, what are the main themes that come through, having those then be almost overseen by a group of clinicians to go, these are the parts of that that are relevant to us. I don't know if there would be things coming through from a manufacturer that are relevant to them in terms of, hey, these are the pieces that we need to get approval, or whether that's TGA, FDA approval, etc., that they would then bring up and go, this is where this is an issue. I think one of the big ones to sort of watch out for is going to be making sure that we don't do, or if we are doing the validation stuff ourselves, that it's not limited to one particular company. And I think that's where, as a society, it would be worth saying, or being careful that we don't endorse one specifically just because someone's got that particular eye tracker or that's more popular at the moment, or whatever. So I think it's one, limiting what we ask of eye tracking companies to kind of keep to the what are the features that should be there and the justifications. But I think it is getting that multiple viewpoints, and so that's where I'm hoping that list that we've got there actually gets longer than what it is at the moment, because I know we've got the big ones that we all sort of are very familiar with, but I've sort of noticed there's a lot of smaller eye tracking companies that have started to pop up in recent years as well.
Yeah, and some of them are real and some of them are app-based and in development. So I think we at least need to remain aware of them, because most of those do have a clinical focus as opposed to a research focus.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I should mention as well, I think it was the very first meeting we had where it was said that, you know, it would be important that any standards that are developed by ISCET are not limited to any one piece of hardware. And so, you know, that much is covered as well.
I think it's further than the standards, though. I think it comes down to the validation pieces. So it's showing how you validate against the particular standards that get set. So I think they could have input in terms of the standards and could help feed into that if that is a focus group that we end up doing, or a survey that we end up doing. I think that's really useful. But it's making sure that we survey multiples of them. One of the other points that I had when I was looking through that, and I put it as a little question sort of on the side as a comment on that page, was, do we want to limit that just to eye tracking in terms of the hardware, or should we be thinking about companies that analyze the output? So there's some that are apps specifically to analyze the output from different trackers. So you know, the one that came to my mind was iMotions for, you know, analyzing Tobii or analyzing some of the biometrics that come in together. They're not necessarily an eye tracker themselves, but it's the eye tracking analysis software that, you know, do they have a different viewpoint? Are there pieces in that, you know, is it, we're obviously never going to get into that code because a lot of that's going to be proprietary. So some of that is going to have to be, how does that work? How do you validate that code to make sure that it is matching up with what we decide, or what the standards decide from what raw data should be?
That'll be the concussion detection.
That was my thought process, Larry, because I'm going, well, what does that actually mean? Is it then picking up this piece here? Do they just say it meets these standards, or what level of visibility, I guess, should we be asking for as a?
So I was going to, the analogy here, and part of the reason why this society ended up being called ISCET was the analogy to ISCEV, ISCEV, International Society for Clinical Electrophysiology of Vision, where they define standards for clinical electrophysiology. And then the various manufacturers can then meet those standards, and then they say this protocol that you run using our machine is the ISCEV compliant version of the test. You know, I don't know though, and we can maybe look into this, how much you know, you can actually delve into the code and confirm that they are indeed doing it to an ISCEV standard. And I guess a lot of the things with ISCEV, it's more to do with how often does the pattern reverse on, you know, and what are the luminances of, and so on. You can measure those things. But when it comes to what we're likely to be coming together with the ISCET standards, it's going to be things like low pass filtering the data and all the kind of pre-processing steps of saccade detection or whatever that might be. And it might be a little bit harder for us to validate that those, you know, if a manufacturer claims to have produced the ISCET compliant version of the test, that is indeed what it's doing. I guess you could argue that it's not really our remit to police it so much as to simply say these are the standards, and you would hope that manufacturers actually do that, but I don't know.
I guess that's my question is how does that work in I7? Maybe that's something that we follow up, but do they then have a little badge that says where this is I7 compliant? Who checks that? How does that work? And just yeah.
Ruth Hamilton is the president of I7. She's been at a lot of these meetings, so I will write to her to ask and report that back at the next meeting how exactly ISEV do that. If indeed they do kind of police it, they might just be passively putting out the standard and saying, you know, that's it. And so I'll follow that up, and Ruth may well this meeting anyway. I expect she probably will be.
I think the old line manufacturers are generally pretty open about their systems, but
a lot of the new ones aren't.
No, and even places like Pupil Labs, which historically their traditional systems have been, but their new neural network based one, I have absolutely no idea how that works, and I'm not sure they've ever tried to explain it. It's where they just train. It's a zero calibration system that's trained on a normative database of saccades, but it's obviously not a clinical instrument because it wasn't trained on abnormal eye movements. But that's sort of a precedent, I suspect, for some of these concussion detection things. And they may be really black boxes.
Well, for a lot of these as well, you know, we're often finding that people are creating their own code to run something specific. So thinking about something like SR research, where you can put up whatever you like in terms of the images. You know, is it something where it would be worth us having a repository of, hey, here's the code for running the ISCET version on, and just having a list that people can add to. So if they want to put it there, so not saying, hey, we only do this one, but just making it open so that they could go, you know, this is the saccade code for pro saccades to run on an SR tracker. This is the code if you want to run it on a, you know, a Toby tracker, or making it really generic like that so that people can have that repository to go, this is. So that's where I think we would police it a little bit, in that we'd provide it and we'd make sure that, you know, the code was put forward by our own members, and we made sure that the stuff that we put up was our own. But I would be really curious to know how ISEV does it.
I really like that idea, actually, because if between the coming up of the standard and actually manufacturers providing it within their hardware, there's going to be no way for people to actually use the ISET standard. So actually having code available online so that the latest standard can be complied with, even though the manufacturers might not have yet built it into their systems, because that could take years for an manufacturer to actually provide that button on their system. That's a really good idea. I'm writing that down as a point for us to potentially consider having a code repository for these tests. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of I saw a lot of research paper that use different parameters, for example, to extract a fixation saccade. Everyone's parameter is different, but they are finding sure is really different. So I'm just wondering, is there a kind of research can explain why the findings are really different, why they choose these parameters? I think there is so that's why I think that's really need somebody that can justify, can just explain that these inconsistencies, can just so we all can use the eye tracker, we can trust the eye tracking technologies. Yes, so I think that's a very good point. I'm looking forward to, our body can do something to really can just explain these inconsistencies, or yes, as you said, have some standards.
Yeah, because like in the nystagmus, there was a paper that scanning and fixations, but they never defined how they detected a fixation. And in infantile nystagmus, that's a really problematic concept. And wrote to the authors and got no reply. So it's one of the only papers on the subject out there, but we have no idea where the data come from.
Yeah.
So this is a problem with research methods reporting, and hopefully now there's that published, list of things to report in an eye tracking paper. That sort of thing can hopefully happen less now. And it's not, although that's not specifically a clinical thing, it obviously feeds into clinical stuff, because this, ISCET is going to be basing its standards on published research for, what is the best fixation detector, what is the best ACAD detector. Those things will probably vary based on the condition that's trying to be looked into as well. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that these standards will be dynamic. So it's not like we'll set in stone, this is forevermore the fixation detector that we're all going to use for absolutely everything ever. It can change, and indeed it should change as new information comes out. Just going back to that point about the black box systems and not knowing exactly how something's outputs work based on the inputs, we might run into a problem soon as eye tracking algorithms are likely to start relying more and more on AI. And and with that, of course, is that nobody knows how it works, and you can't know how it works. But you can at least, I don't know enough about AI to really be able to work this out, but I believe you can at least know the data set it was trained on or something to at least know the parameters of what it's doing. But it may become difficult for us to actually explain, if that becomes the standard, to use these AI-based event detectors, how you actually codify that might be difficult. But
that might then become, do we have the test sets, for example? So do we then have the range and the variety of test sets, and we say, okay, over these, if they meet these particular requirements, that then ticks the box if it is an AI system. But yeah, in my head, and the reason I keep coming back to this is thinking about the basic CAD one. So if we had a pro CAD group, for example, how many trials do you need to be running to be comfortable with it? How many, what level of frame rate do you need to be able to pick it up? What level of calibration certainty would you be comfortable with? So just kind of talking through some of those on a really basic level before using the research to branch out into some of them. And I think for some of them, there are going to be areas where the research disagrees with each other, or there isn't a very clear, this is how it should be done. So I'm almost wondering if there should be a section where we kind of have, I don't know if it's hot topics or eye movements in discussion, or some sort of an area where we go, this is not a standard as a standard sort of to say, but this is our best, this is where we think it's going, or this is where, or to point out these are the two different dichotomous bits to this particular kind of eye movement that people should be aware of when they're thinking about that clinically.
Is the issue being there's likely to be disagreement about some standards where it's not clear cut? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so I think they should be separated out from the ones that once a committee's kind of put them together, yes, they should have a review date on them, so they should be dynamic and be reviewed. But I think if everyone's kind of in agreement and they're clear and we've decided, yep, that's the standard for that one, I can see some of those being very easy, whereas I can see some of them being a very big discussion. And I think where they're not clear, or there's arguments both ways, that keeping that voice in there for that argument, I think, is important. And I almost think they should almost be separate sections in terms of what we put out.
Okay. So yeah, where there's where it's unclear, rather than saying this is the standard, you could say you could do it in either of these ways.
Yep.
Yeah. And until hopefully there's more research to point to a particular.
Yes.
Obviously, until there is an agreed standard, then it becomes difficult to do that patient comparison between different groups. And but I take the point that will sometimes just be cases where it's really not clear. There might be an advantage to doing it one way and an advantage to doing it another way, and they don't really. Yeah, you can't just rest on one of them.
And there's some patient groups for which you need to do a certain way that might not be the main standard, just because of the characteristics of the disorder.
Well, thinking about fixation, that fits, right? Fixation we will do differently for an nystagmus patient versus a completely, non-nystagmus patient.
Yeah.
I don't want to say normal there.
Yeah, I was thinking of things like Niemann-Pick, where you have really disturbed gaze in certain directions, or there's some conditions where applying strict standards is virtually impossible. So what can you do if you have more lenient or adapted standards, it's still scientifically valid.
Hmm.
So I think there will be cases like that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was decided in an earlier meeting was that the standards would likely be defined per disorder. So rather than being, saying the way that ISEV does things is that they have a standard for each technology. So there's one for ERG, one for EOG, and so on. Whereas because the same technology and the same tests are applied to lots of different scenarios with eye tracking, at least in the previous meeting, it was discussed that it might be better to have an individual standard for each disorder. So a ProSICAD, and exactly what you were saying, a ProSICAD test will be different depending on who it is that's undertaking the test. And we suggested having, there could be a broad standard for general application for these things, but then you would have specific ones, so that hopefully that can be dealt with by having individual standards for each disorder. But that again could get quite messy as well. There's a huge amount of work to be done here.
Yes.
Yep. And then I think just with those is working out who you ask and who ends up on your papers for some of those as well. So being a little bit careful about how some of that works, so that it's not UK centric, it's not USA. These are all the people that I kind of know, so that's the group, but actually using the different pieces to go, if there's 50 people, do we all contribute and do it that way? So having some sort of thoughts around that as well.
Okay. And actually, one thing that's just come up as you said that is that we've talked about potential bias from manufacturers, but you could also conceive of there being bias from individual researchers, because somebody may have developed their own filter, and then they're going to want to steer the conversation towards, well, we should be using my filter. So we will need to have some protocols in place as how we deal with that, and just making sure that the conversation is being steered in terms of what's the most helpful way to do things for the patient.
In the concussion area, I know one group that was an academic group, and suddenly it's now a company. So, they've essentially more or less withdrawn from the university and are now a startup. So the sort of openness that you might get from academic researchers may be quite different when they suddenly morph into a business for whom the information becomes proprietary.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess, but that usually would only apply to information that they haven't already published on there, I would imagine, because IP is only protected for things you haven't put out in the real world.
But I'm not sure. I know the product because I'm actually on one of the papers, but I'm not sure if the adaptation from using an iLink in a university lab to turning this into an app running on an iPhone, there would be a lot of parametric differences, and those differences would not have been published. So that's one instance, but I suspect as
Larry, we just lost you for a second.
My system didn't say so. That's annoying. Sometimes the transition from an open system in an academic setting.
And now, Larry, you're muted.
No, I can still hear you, Larry.
Maybe I don't know what's going on. There may be a transition where we no longer know what the system does.
So I suppose, it's not really our remit to know how individual manufacturers' devices run, so much as we would provide standards and then they would have to meet them, or at least if they want to be able to show that they're providing an ISCET compliant standard. This was another thing that was talked about. How can you keep track of all the different manufacturers? And I guess that's not really something we need to worry about, so long as we say here's the best practice way of doing it. I also think maybe one thing that just what we've been discussing is in regards to conflicts of interest, and making sure that when they are actually developing standards, that there is some protocol in place for people declaring conflicts of interest. I've already mentioned to you both in email that I have ideas for potentially moving towards setting up a company and eye tracking myself. And if that were to happen, then I would recuse myself, obviously, from committees and making any decisions in that way. So I want to make sure that would have been said at a meeting as well. But at the moment, that's not the case. But I think we do need to make sure that anybody who's involved in any of this process, there is a formal way of registering conflicts of interest, particularly when we're putting together the actual standards themselves, for anyone who has those kind of things. So we can maybe do that in the committee meeting.
Yep. Perfect. Does anybody have any other points to add on that?
Not me.
Nope. Thank you guys for coming. Sorry it's been so small. Thanks for coming, Matt. I know it's really late at night. And I will send through the recording when it pops up.
Brilliant. Great. Okay. I'll put the notes so within the next few days, and it's brilliant that we've now got a full committee, so we can hopefully move things forward at a bit of a better pace. Really glad to have somebody involved in communication. So Sian, thank you very much for volunteering for that, and I will link up with Mario, who's offered to do some help with the website as well.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.
So nice to meet you all.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.